Hello, everyone. This is what your pastor didn't tell you. Today, we are talking about God's divine glory. What does that mean? What is the glory in the Old Testament and in the New Testament? What is that talking about? This answer might actually shock you. It's not as simple as you might think. It's not just some, making God look good or something like that. How are you doing today, Dr. Thomas Wagner?
Many thanks for this and for the invitation, Zach. I'm doing fine, and I'm very glad to be with you to give you some ideas I had with my monograph on the Hebrew term kavod, which is the Hebrew origin, which was translated to the Greek by doxa, and what we nowadays call glory as the divine glory. So I'm happy to share all these ideas with you.
Awesome. I think this is really exciting. This is a topic I care about a lot, and I think that other people should as well. So, for readers unfamiliar with the biblical Hebrew, how would you describe the basic meaning of this word kavod and why it matters in understanding the Old Testament?
Yeah, so the Hebrew term kavod is a abstract term. It's a feminine, which shows us always that it's an abstract form what we have. And the basic meaning of the root kavad or kaved, it's better because it describes circumstances what we have, means heavy. So it is something heavy. We look closer to the lexical meaning of the word, then we see there is another term called kaved, which is the masculine form of it. This is the liver, so one of our organs, the most heavy of all these organs. And then we have this abstract with a vote, which is translated as glory, but it always has something in mind, like it's something very heavy, it's something very important. And if you transfer it on another level, it's something very meaningful, what we're talking about.
Interesting. So, on that, real quick, how is there so many different concepts there where you have heaviness, you have delivering, and even the word kavod in general, that's used in a lot of different ways. So is it just a word that means a lot of different things, or are those things
No.
connected? How are they connected?
Yeah, the question is how they are connected. It does not mean anything else than this. It means heaviness. And of course, if a priest in former times sacrificed an animal and he was in a way able to interpret the organs of this animal while sacrificing it, the liver was the most heavy of all the organs. So this is what he realized when he came up with this idea of this is something what I call kaved. And of course, the idea of kavod as something which belongs to a person, whether a divine person or a human person, is an expression about the social status of this person. And of course, if someone is meaningful, heavy for his society, he is described with the term kavod, as the liver is described as the most heavy organ. So he's the most heavy person, what we have in our social surroundings there.
Fascinating. Okay. And there's a very similar concept in other texts that we have from outside of the Bible, of the Hebrew Bible. So, like in Egypt, Mesopotamia, did they have a similar concept like glory and honor that
Yeah.
maybe could help us understand this better?
Yeah, so of course, we're talking about societies in which the concept of shame and honor was very important to describe social circumstances. There is no attention on the meaning of heaviness in the Egyptian literature, but there's something similar in the Mesopotamian literature, especially in the inscription of the Neo-Assyrian period. And this is the term melamu, or other term could be puluchti, which refers to a kind of splendor of a solar deity, which was given to the king and which was used from the king to express his appearance by other cities. So when he was on a siege. So you could see that he described the effect of his presence by this term to make the others being afraid of him, that they did not fight against him, that they lose their abilities to fight. And this is, of course, limited to Neo-Assyrian royal inscriptions. And we see in the further Mesopotamian literature that the term melamo is always used for a kind of solar radiance coming with this. So there we get the first hints that the term kavod could also mean something which is visible, which is connected to sunlight, or a kind of radiance, really extreme radiance, to become visible with it.
Interesting. Yeah, I wanted people to see this. So you'll see on the picture, this is the steel Hammurabi, and
Yeah.
you have little waves coming from the shoulders
Yes.
there. So would you say this is a
This
picture
could,
of this, maybe?
yeah. There are other pictures you could use, like the solar disk of Ashur, where you
No.
also see this kind of radiance with it. But of course, if you see Shamash here, so the sun god, you see the radiance, and we would describe the radiance now like a form of appearance, what we see when this person is visible. Then we would describe it like there is a radiance coming out from this person.
Fascinating.
In an ancient Near Eastern concept, this radiance belongs to the body. That means this is like an arm or a leg. It's a part of the body, what you see here. And of course, if you step over to the lower heavens, where Shamash becomes visible with the sun, the radiance, what you see, it always has an effect on person, but on the other side, it's a attestation of his physical presence on heaven. So there is a different connection in between the effect and the body parts, as we know it from modern concepts of human bodies.
Interesting. And then we also have this where it looks like he's got a sun behind the person on the right
Yeah.
here, if you can see it.
Yeah, this also means the radiance coming from this body. Huh? If I see
Yeah.
this, this might be from Persian time. So the stem seal, what you see here, of course, there is the moon combined with it, or it can also be Neo-Babylonian times. I see it right with the worshipper in front of it, and of course, there you see this kind of radiance which belongs to a deity.
Really fascinating stuff. It's not every day where we can see pictures of what they're actually talking about. So that's really cool. So
Yeah.
would you say that the biblical writers or the Hebrew Bible writers in what they call the Old Testament, are they reshaping this concept of the kavod, of the glory, or is it just something that they kind of inherited in how they use language? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course. I guess we need to differ in between the Hebrew Bible, how to use the term. If we go to the book of Isaiah, which I would say this is the very beginning of the idea of using the term kavod in the sense of divine glory, what we see. And if you go to Isaiah 10, then you see there is the story told of the Assyrian king coming to Israel to conquer Israel. And there's a description of his efforts, what he does, and a description of his hubris. And this is also already combined with the idea of kavod, that God is, on the one hand, destroying the kavod of the Assyrian king because he behaved in the wrong way, as a appearance of divine kavod in this way. So it's a kind of fight, what we see at the very beginning. And I would say in this way, the biblical authors, going back also to Isaiah 6, where the kavod is a kind of divine presence within the country, I would say that they picked up the Assyrian idea of kind of divine splendor, something like this, having an effect on historical situations. From there, the term became another meaning with it in form of heaviness, of social meaningfulness, with the priestly scribe as a first source of the Pentateuch. And there they describe the kavod in different ways than they do it in the book of Isaiah.
Interesting. And yeah, we'll continue to get into that as we go on. And so just for clarity there, so was there anything else you wanted to add about whether it's reshaping the concept of kavod or?
Yes, of course. I can follow up with this in the priestly scribe. So if you go to this kind of literature, you see a story combined with the Exodus, where the term kavod is reflected in different ways. So with the plague story, you see the priestly author uses the word kaved to describe the heaviness of God's acting against the Pharaoh, all the people of Egypt in this way. In Exodus 16, when they are stopping in the wilderness and asking for food, there is something visible on the horizon which is described as God's kavod. And this is the first time that this term appears. In chapter 24, when they arrive at Mount Sinai and Moses went uphill, so then you see that the kavod is coming down to the mountain and that Moses is stacking within the kavod. And finally in Exodus 40, after the tent of meeting or the tabernacle is already built, then it is filled with the divine kavod. So it's the story of divine appearance in the middle of Israel, and it's the question of divine presence with it. And if we go to a phenomenological level in the way the priestly author is describing it, then it also becomes a kind of light, of radiance, which becomes visible at Mount Sinai. And people were not able to walk uphill as Moses did because of this heavy shining light. And we also use kind of light metaphorical language when the appearance of kavod within the divine sanctuary is described. So there is a strong combination still with visibility and with light phenomena, what we have with the priestly literature within the Pentateuch. In the Pentateuch, it becomes, in a way, a double-fold concept. So you can see that kavod means the appearance of God within the tent or before the tent, and to the same time, it means the constant presence of God in the tent. And that means, of course, the idea is that God is not present all the time in the tent, but is kavod as a kind of it's a part of his body, what they describe there, but it's not the full body. It's, I would say, just the kavod, but this also describes the full presence of God with it. But there is they distinguish in between it. And of course, if you, and then we come up to the concept, what we see within the Psalms, and this is basing on the social idea of kavod, that honor is something visible, what we have within society when we honor people. So then they have a exaggerated place within a society, and also like the royal throne is called kisei kavod, which means it's just an honorful chair we're sitting on, if I translate it word by word. So then we see that the Psalms, they start playing with it. So people are giving kavod by praising God, and to the same time, he is the one having kavod, honor, because it's given by the people and he represents it, and it's part of his personality that he is the honorable, or he is an honored person in this way.
That's really, really fascinating there. So you talked about how it kind of can be some type of radiance or light, but it also keeps the Israelites from going up the mountain. So there is some type of physical aspect there.
Yeah,
Some scholars have talked about it as like a substance, and you also said that it was part of his body. So that really changes things. People probably wouldn't get that connection if they were just reading the text, you know,
yeah.
in a vacuum, essentially. But um, could um, could you talk about uh, anything else about it being physical? So it's not just, or is it only physical, or is it more than physical? You would say it's
It,
more than physical too, is right?
yeah, y- I would say yes and no to the same time.
Okay.
For us, it's more than physical because we are differing between the physics of a human body, which we describes in terms of organs, in terms of body parts, in terms of blood cycle and things like this. And we have a social sphere where we see a person interacting with other persons. So psychology might be something which is closely connected to the concept of anthropology, what we see in the Hebrew Bible. So there is something which people have within their body, like the brain, but it also has an impact on their behavior, what they have in society. And
Hmm.
what we see in the Hebrew Bible is that humans and also divine entities are described as social bodies. That means, of course, you have your physics, with all your body parts, but to the same time, your interaction inside society is also a part of physical expression of yourself. And in this way, if you would describe honor in a modern concept, we will always say this is something which comes up in in between persons. So there is someone giving you honor and you feel honored,
Hmm.
but you can lose it afterwards. So if they don't honor you anymore, after a while, you don't feel honored anymore. And there, the Hebrew Bible really differs from this because by describing God, it's not necessary that people honor him, that he is a person having meaningfulness, heaviness, what means kavod. He is it by himself, but to the same time, people are always reflecting on this by honoring him
Hmm.
with praising and worshiping.
Interesting.
Yeah?
That's
So
fascinating.
so in this way, we cannot differ um, um, between physics and social sphere in the Hebrew Bible concept or the ancient Near Eastern concept. It's really different than we do it today.
Thank you. Yeah. So there's you've talked about how it's kind of this kavod is kind of seen physically localized in sacred space, like the temple tabernacle. It's filling the building essentially, and then you also talk about Isaiah 6, where it seems the kavod's almost filling the world. So that's really interesting. Um, in Ezekiel, it talks about how it's transferred. You have a
Yeah,
vision of the kavod moving, uh,
yeah.
and the it seems like, yeah, these all these descriptions are something that's happening physically. So, could you talk a little bit more about Ezekiel's vision
I,
of what's going on there?
Ezekiel, I would say dealing with kavod, this is the most fascinating text we have in the entire Hebrew Bible. So if we go to the Hebrew text, we see, and first I would start on a linguistical level. If I read translations, whether antique translations or modern translations, it seems to be a text like all the other texts.
Mhm.
But what we have is a text which is written for not understanding what is described in the text. So the author is using language to irritate the reader, that the reader does not understand what he sees. And at the very end, the text ends with that the prophet realizes that out of the cloud there is a light, shining light with it. And this looks like the bow on the heaven on the day when it rains, which means it's the typical phenomenon we know from the flood story at the end, that the rainbow becomes visible. And in this moment, he realizes, okay, what I saw is the divine kavod. And the divine kavod in this way means the entire representation of the divine coming out of the sanctuary and being present somewhere in Mesopotamia. And of course, if we go to the priestly concept, we see that the filling of the tabernacle with kavod, it's described like there is a cloud coming into the tabernacle. And of course, if you would break it down to a material level, you see the priest smoking in the temple, whether with incense or by burning sacrifices, something like this. So there is a lot of cloud, a lot of smoke within the temple. And what Ezekiel is describing now is his ability to look inside this cloud. He sees what is there. And then he describes entities, which he just calls entities, kābôd in Hebrew terms. And at the end, he realized, okay, these are the cherubims, which are under the divine throne. And of course, then he sees a person through a shimmering, with a shimmering light, through a kind of kind of stone. What he sees, so he's described as like it's frozen, or it's like thick ice. What he sees through, so there is just some shimmering light. What he sees with it, and at the end, just by the rainbow, he realized, okay, this full meaning, or what I saw, and its full meaning, this is kavod. What is there? If you go further reading the book, this entity becomes visible in chapter 8 through 11 again. And this is another weird story within the book of Ezekiel, telling us the story about Jerusalem after the first exile in 598, when parts of the scribes, the priests, they were already exiled to Mesopotamia, and Ezekiel was one of them. And there is still a group living within Jerusalem. And they're organized by the Shaphanites, which is a family which has its origins somewhere outside Jerusalem, what we can read in the book of Jeremiah. And you see, okay, they took over, and now they are trying to worship the right gods, to be sure that nothing else will happen anymore, like an assurance what they did with there. So they behave in this way as God already left the town. But the result of their behavior is that he leaves the town afterwards. So at the end, in chapter 11, verse 25, then it's described that the kabod leaves the town. But in this way, it's like another weird story within this prophetic book, that it's kind of self-fulfilling prophecy what they do. And of course, it's a question of realization and of interpreting signs, what we see there. So in this way, no, there is no difference in between a concept of kavod within the book of Ezekiel and with what we find in P. It's another story what is told with it, and it's a typical prophetical story, while the priestly source is just telling about the outer image, what is visible when you come to the temple, and what you see there as worshiper. The prophet is able to look into the divine sphere and to describe what is there. And this is the difference in between P and the book of Ezekiel.
Fascinating. And just for clarity for people, so when you refer to P, you're referring to essentially the priestly editor that took, whatever text we have of the Torah, and what we do is we can see there's some type of priestly theme where someone that was concerned with these priestly aspects was editing the text and putting their ideas into it, essentially.
Yeah, sorry for that, Sach.
Yeah,
it's
you're
so
fine.
common in science, in theological science, to talk about P, and we all know what we mean with this abbreviation.
Yeah, right. No, you're definitely right. So your book identifies three ways the Old Testament talks about God's glory in the priestly writings, Isaiah, and Ezekiel. Um, was there anything else you wanted to add about those three sections? I think we'll dig into it a little bit deeper after we talk about generally, but was there anything else you wanted to add there?
Well, I think the main concepts are visible with these three parts of the Hebrew Bible, the three books of the Hebrew Bible, that we see that there is kind of conceptualization of the divine within these books. And of course, I also added a chapter on the Psalms. And what we can see with the Psalms is that there is this kind of social interaction, that glory is something, or kavod is something which is part of the temple service, which becomes visible. People come to the temple to worship the kavod. And on the other side, we know this is the kind of presence what is there. And if I would describe it in simple terms, I would say what we see with all these concepts is that they are trying to find a way to describe the visibility of the divine. And we are talking about a cult which has no images in post-exilic times. So the ban of the images already started. There is nothing visible within the temple anymore. And now you start describing how it looks like, even if you don't see anything.
Interesting. So are you saying that this is someone writing that hasn't seen it themselves? Is that what you're saying? Or
No, it's, yeah. What does seeing mean? So for us, it's always like we have something in front of our eyes. This is what we see. But if you follow up concepts on visual perception, then we see that seeing is always a selection of things what we realize within our environment. And this concept leads us on to the question if the things what we see are really the things which are in front of us, or if we just see things we already know. And this means our brain is producing mental images. And what the authors use to describe within this kind of literature is a mental image. But if you would ask them if this is reality, that when they come to the temple, that they see what they describe, they would say yes. Even if we would go to there and we would see something different with it. So I would say it's a kind of interpretation. If the described visibility of divine glory is visible for everyone, but for someone who belongs to a ritual community reading these texts, things like this are visible.
I see. Thank you. And Ezekiel's visions of glory, they're especially vivid and dramatic. Did you have anything you wanted to add there as well? We kind of already got into that.
No, I think for the entire book of Ezekiel, the main topic is that the kavod moves out of the temple, and it's the idea, the new idea within Ezekiel, that the kavod is something which is not directly bound to the temple, which is movable, and that even if the temple is destroyed, the kavod is still there. And at the end, you see with chapter 40 that the new temple is filled with kavod again. So he takes over his normal seat again, and then God is present in the new temple in this way.
I see. All right. And you also explore the kavod in the Psalms. So how does the idea of glory function in worship and poetry compared to prophetic or priestly texts?
Yeah, that's interesting. So if you go to Psalm 24, which is one of the oldest psalms we have in the entire Hebrew Bible, there you see that God is called God of glory, or El Kavod, what's in Hebrew. And there it means a specific character, what is described with it. So he is like in the Ugaritic text, where you have the same mentioning of or description of divine entities. This is a specific term, and I'm quite sure that this psalm origins in times when also in Israel monotheism was not the coming way to describe the divine. So they were still thinking about different divine entities, and his specific character was to be heavy or to be honored, to be glory. So, and then you see the effect when this kind of God enters the temple, what happens to the entire world in a way. This changes in post-exilic times, and with the upcoming monotheism, then kabôd describes the social status within the community. And then we see that, of course, God centered in the middle of the community is also the most heavy person. He is the most meaningful person. He is the one who appears as a royal figure, and he's sitting on the throne. So you have the full imagery in a way of a royal person, which people knew from their daily circumstances whenever they had contact with the king or the one leading the community, whether in a smaller village or in a huger town. There's no difference in it. So they also are trying to present themselves as a honorable, meaningful person in this way. So this is an interaction what we see within the Psalms.
I see. Thank you. Awesome. Yeah. So I believe you only talked about just a couple texts there, but I also didn't want you to miss anything else that you wanted to add. Was there any other text? Because there's certainly lots of texts that talk about the kabôd in the Psalms. Was there any other ideas just worth mentioning, or are they mostly the same idea?
Yeah. What I would say is that we see that in times when the Hebrew Bible were written, and we could speak about different textual stratas, like in archaeology, where you see all these stratas when you dig in the earth. So we are also talking about textual stratas, that we find these main concepts within Isaiah, Ezekiel, priestly source. And then you see that later authors adapted these kind of concepts and used them as kind of fixed term. So of course they had something in mind to use, especially this term and not another one. So you also could call God the Kadosh, also the Holy One would also be possible, and it was used in several books in this way. But they see that they adapt to all these concepts in later times. So altogether, we have something like 60 texts within the Hebrew Bible using the term kavod to describe God's visibility or his presence in this way.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, so on that, so in your book, you talked about a redaction and critical approach. So for those unfamiliar with the method, could you talk about how that helps us uncover different concepts of God's glory?
Yeah, so the idea of redaction criticism, it's not that old in OT scholarship, in Old Testament scholarship. So now we're working on redaction criticism for maybe 40 to 50 years now. And of course, the main idea of redaction criticism coming up from literary criticism, that already in the 18th and 19th century, people were thinking about that we had different sources out of which the Hebrew text was combined. For my students at university, it's always problematic to think in these ways. So, and if you're not familiar with this method, it's quite easy to use Wikipedia to understand how it works. If you just take a normal article, Wikipedia article, and you click on versions, then you see that different people were writing in these texts. So there was someone writing a basic layer, a first draft of the text, and then people adding things, they deleting things again. And what we see nowadays is just the last version of this redaction process. So, of course, in the Hebrew Bible, we don't have any usernames anymore who added some of the material within the text we have. But for my students, it always becomes a kind of more visible using Wikipedia articles to understand what a redactional text is. So we cannot claim a single author for one text, even if we have the superscriptions with the names. We are quite sure that these books were edited in a longer process. And question of redaction criticism is always, can we reconstruct the history of the text in terms from a basic layer to the final form we have nowadays? And now you're asking for concepts. What we see is that if we differ in these textual layers, we see that concepts are not there from the very beginning on. The concepts are things which comes up. So there is a use of a term. The next one adds another aspect with it. After a while, people asking the question, how do they are interconnect with these kind of uses? And then they start conceptualizing what we have there, like to describe what it means. And this is something we find within the Hebrew Bible a lot in this way.
Interesting. So something like you have the priestly sources, and then you have the non-priestly texts. So you're saying that in those non-priestly texts, if you want to describe it that way, we have different concepts of kavod. Is kavod used at all? How is it described there?
Yeah, but if you go to the Pentateuch and the non-priestly text within the Pentateuch, there is no mentioning of kavod. This is the interesting fact. So the very beginnings are in the book of Isaiah. So like Isaiah 6, 10, where it is described. And then you see that the priestly authors who already had access to non-priestly literature, which origins from earlier times, they start shaping this kind of kavod concept to describe God's presence within his people. Yes, for me, it was like at the very beginning when I started my investigation, I was quite sure I will write a history of the meaning of the term. And after a while, I figured out this is not possible. So if you have an idea which book is or which text is earlier than the other, I was quite sure at the very beginning I will find a single line to describe the development of it. And I never found a single line. So we see there are 2 or 3 concepts which are in a way connected to each other, since they all have something in mind with visibility and solar appearance, but they conceptualize the term in different ways. And what we see in the later layers of the Hebrew Bible is that they start combining these 3 concepts with each other. So, and now going back to the very beginning, to your first question with it, in a way, there is no proper meaning of the word. So we just have these concepts.
Fascinating. Okay, thank you. Yeah. And in your study, so you wrote your monograph on this, what would you say was the key findings or just interesting findings that you didn't expect to find in this?
I was quite sure to find literary concepts of divine presence with it. I did not expect that I found a form of description of visibility of God. And that we can see that these authors were dealing with something which was not present in their communities anymore. So they are describing something which people could not see to these times anymore. And this is something I would say, and also reading later literature where the term kavod, or then the Greek translation doxa, is used, this idea of visibility and the necessity of the visibility of the divine within communities that they can trust in the presence of God. I didn't expect that this is such a deep meaning for the Hebrew Bible, and this
Hmm.
was really was for me was the finding of my study.
Fascinating. And so, a lot of times in popular culture, at least, you have this idea that God's the most glorious, right? He deserves all the glory. Humans, no glory. Is there any times in the Old Testament where we see that God gives kavod, glory, to humans?
No, I didn't find a single text with it. So that
Interesting.
God is spending honor or kavod to persons. We could think about that this kind of giving honor to a person is also adapted to the idea of choosing a king. That this is the most honored person within his society, and then going further to the description of Jesus in the New Testament when during his baptize, when he was called the divine son. So this is a kind of a pairing and giving honor to a special person. So a social role with it. If we use kavod in the meaning of the social meaningfulness of a person.
Hmm. Okay, interesting. So I got a few texts for you. You tell me what you think. So I'm sure you're aware of Psalm 8, where it talks about, yeah, it's talking about humankind, and it says, "You have made them a little lower than God or the angels." It depends on how you interpret that,
Yeah.
and crowned him with glory and
And
honor. And glory is kavod. What do you think? Is that a different concept than you think, or what do you think
no,
there?
no, no. This is exactly what I meant. So what we describe here is the royalization of humankind. You
Mm,
have similar in Genesis 1 when they would all humans are described as the image of God and not just the king. So if you go to these kind of concepts, anthropological or royal concepts within the
mm,
ancient Near East, you always see the king in this role. And of course, to describe humankind in these royal images, I would say that the crowning with chesed and kavod, so
mm,
with honor and glory, or glory and honor, you can translate it in all the ways. Um, um, that you can see that this special social status
mm,
is used to describe the meaning of humankind for creation. I would say it in this way.
mm,
And in this way, of course, crowning, you could say, yeah, then he honors a person in this way. But in fact, it's not the same as people worship God and bless him and to
yeah.
describe the kavod in this way. So this is
Mm,
the reason why I said no. I didn't find a text where God gives glory or gives honor to someone.
mm,
They use the idea of incarnation of a king to describe the social role of humans within a cultic and also a social setting, I would say.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So just for clarity, so you're saying that there is a concept of almost giving kavod as in worship, essentially, which is to God. But of course, God's not worshiping humans.
Yeah,
But there are some places where we see that humans are given this kavod, this glory.
yeah, yeah. It's also part of our personality, I would say, that we are described in a Old Testament way in this way, and then it was adapted in the Christian literature in later
Mhm.
times, first by describing Jesus in this way, and then by describing the members of the Christian communities in this way.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So on that topic there, so how does kavod, as understood in the Hebrew Bible, how does that different than what we see from doxa?
That's an interesting question. So doxa means the appearance of a person. If you go to Socratic literature, also with Plato, you see, and classical Greek literature, it's always the appearance. And it has nothing in common with what we see in the Hebrew Bible. But what we see is that by the translation of the Hebrew text to the Greek, they used, very beginning in Alexandria, in Egypt, where they started translating the Septuagint, they used the term doxer for the term kavod in the Hebrew Bible. And by this use, and of course, I assume that the translators understood kavod in terms of appearance and not in terms of social role, of heaviness, things like this. But in this way, the meaning of doxa changed for many Greek-speaking persons in this surrounding. So you had this Jewish community in Alexandria, and with the distribution of the Septuagint writings, they were distributed first in the east of the Roman Empire, and then you can see in the discussion of the church fathers that this concept of doxer is more than what is meant in Greek philosophy. And then you have all these not religious ideas, these ideas, ancient Near Eastern ideas, combined also with the term doxa with it. And this already becomes visible if you go to early Jewish literature, like the book of Tobit, where we have a proper use of doxer in the sense of kavod of Hebrew text with it. And there you see, okay, there's Jewish literature which has no origin in Hebrew, which was originally written in Greek, but they used it in the sense of the Hebrew Bible.
Interesting. Okay, so what you're saying is originally this word doxer or doxo, however you want to pronounce that word was just used for appearance. So you're just for how you look, essentially. But then later, when Jewish culture came along and other ancient Near Eastern concepts, they kind of blended together. Is that right?
Yeah. What we see is that in the Socratic discourse, that we don't have doxa combined with any ethical aspects. So if you follow Socrates, he can describe how people look like. But his main thing is always the outer appearance doesn't say anything about the impact of this person to his society or to his behavior.
Yeah.
And this is something I would say we can all agree in this, also from nowadays experiences we have with other people, that we see that we cannot think about the impact of this person on our society, on ourselves, just by seeing his outer appearance. And this is something Socrates always criticized in this way.
Interesting. Okay. So what that means is when we get into the New Testament times, Paul's letters, the Gospels, stuff like that, when you use when this word doxa is used, it's kind of that would kind of mean that this is a time when it's combining those aspects. But do you think that it has the exact same aspects that we see in the Hebrew Bible, or is there any difference at all?
Yeah, so at the very beginning, I would say it means appearance and it means divine presence. So if you go to the Gospel of John and you see the description of Jesus as the doxer of God, then you see, of course, to the time in which the Gospels are playing, not when they were written. So, of course, they were written after Jesus died and after his resurrection. But what you see is they use this concept as the description. This is the form of divine presence on earth to this time. with Paul, I would say he uses the concept of doxa closely connected to kavod in 1 Corinthians 15 by describing the resurrection of everyone. And how this combination of the new spirit and the new body is the point when people receive this kind of doxa. And of course, this doxa means you are part of the divine world afterwards. And if you have both of them and you are passing the eschatological judgment, then you receive this kind of doxa. And what Paul does with his theology is that he combines belief and doxa. And this is a concept we don't have in the Hebrew Bible. So if you see the use of the word amen in Hebrew books, then you see it's never combined with social status or with meaningfulness and things like this. But this is something Paul brings into the discussion.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So one popular text we have Romans 8:30, where it's like, something about, I can't remember exactly, you've chosen, those people have also been justified, and those who you justified, he also glorified, and he uses this word doxa, if I'm understanding correctly. So is that a concept of status, would you say, or what do you think?
Yeah, I would say so. Glorification of these person, and especially if you turn to Romans 8 and the problems.
Oh, looks like it cut out somehow. Not sure what happened there. Oh, this is really awkward.
We lost the internet connection.
Oh, yeah, I don't know what happened there. That was weird. Okay, but yeah, as you were saying, Romans 8.
In Romans 8, I always read it in combination with 1 Corinthians. So he describes the meaning of the new spirit for the old body within the Christian community. And then you see all these problems appearing within the Christian communities. And what Paul is arguing in like you're being glorified. This is the concept we already find in Exodus 29, when the kabod glorifies the sanctuary, which means he cleans it. And I would say what Paul is thinking about is a kind of cleaning also of the old body where the new spirit is in, and to make it in a way able to participate in an eschatological cult scenery. And this is something really necessary, but it does not mean that it has a direct impact on your behavior. And this is, I would say, this is really the problem for the Paulinian theology, to interconnect the new status of people becoming Christians and the current situations within the communities, which did not really differ from former times. And there is a clash of concept and reality, I would say.
That's really, really fascinating. This is clearly, it's a very difficult word to understand. There's a lot of different things going on at the same time to fully understand the concept of these two words here. So I appreciate you for explaining that. You say this is an English translation of, so if it wasn't already clear, your monograph, people can buy it. It is written in German. So if you want to read it, you do have to use some type of translator if you don't know German, which is what I did. And in this English translation that may or may not be correct, it says kabod is associated with a theology of appearance rather than presence. Is that a good translation? And what did you mean by that?
Yeah, but this is what it means. Yeah. So if I would translate the title of my monograph, it's more like the meaning of kabod in the Hebrew Bible. But if I would describe it in short terms, it's about the appearance of God. And the concept of appearance of God. I would say this is what the monograph is about.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I could see how people might think that when you see the kavod, then you're kind of seeing God, and you're talking about the body. So why not both? Why wouldn't you say it's about the appearance, like how they look, as well as their presence? Because of course you wouldn't see their appearance if they weren't there. Is that making any sense?
Yeah. No, I wouldn't differ between this. Presence means for me something constant, while appearance is something temporary. And I would say kabod describes both.
Okay.
So that he can become visible for a short moment, like described in Ezekiel, but he can also be present within his kabod for good in this way within the tabernacle. And the Hebrew Bible authors, they use the term with both meanings.
Fascinating. Okay, I see now. Okay. And you also talked about there's a connection with fear and kavod.
Yeah.
And it's almost like kavod is sometimes seen as harmful. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, so we already had it at the very beginning with taking over the Assyrian concepts of Melamo and Paluchti, that this is a kind of radiance which makes people being afraid of royal power, and it's used in the Hebrew Bible in the same way. So we have it in Isaiah 10, we have it later on, and especially we have it with a description of the kavod on Mount Sinai, that people were afraid what happened there. They didn't know it. There was something new, and of course it has something fearful. For me, it was like I wrote my dissertation on Isaiah 6 through 9, and the idea of contact to the divine seems to be something really problematic for people in the ancient Near East. What we see in later times is that we have a priestly taxonomy, so that you need to be holy to come in contact with the holy. And in this way, as long as you are not clean and holy, it's really something fearful for you to come in contact with God. And this is what Isaiah already describes in Isaiah 6, that he is complaining about, that in his vision, he is in contact with God, but he had no chance to clean himself before. So then the seraphim take over this role, and then he is holy afterwards. And of course, there's something fearful of divine presence. There is a good English translation of Rudolf Otto's book from the early 20th century, Das Heilige, the Holy. And he describes both ways in which the divine can have an impact on humans, so that it's to the same time completely fascinating to be in contact with the divine, and to the other time it's like we're risking our life in this way. And this is something we should always keep in mind.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So yeah, I think that's totally relatable. If you saw the divine or could imagine it, on one hand, there's a scary aspect because maybe you're not, clean enough or pure enough, right? But on the other hand, there's a fascination with it and excitement. So that's really interesting. Do you know? I mean, you briefly mentioned it in there, but do you have any thoughts on how that connects with the fear of the Lord? Is it the same thing? Because I know with the fear of the Lord, people kind of understand it as kind of reverence or respect. What do you think there is, or is there no connection there?
No, there is a deep connection between fear of the Lord and divine presence, of course. You need not to fear him if he's not realizing what you do. So in this way, of course, there is a cause-effect relation between his presence and human fear. The concept of fear of the Lord, it's also a concept which was developed over a long time, so that finally in wisdom literature, the fear of the Lord is the aim of human life. And that's so the aim of all our attempts to receive knowledge is just this focus is on a literary historical level, a really late development. And on the other hand, you see that there is, of course, an adaptation of royal ideology and the fear of the king or a social person with a higher social status and more power than you have. And then this emotion transfers to a kind of how to describe this, like an habitus towards God, when you are thinking about your own life and about your own religious practices. And this is something, and you can see that there is a development from this first idea of fear to the full description in the later Septuagintal literature of the Hebrew Bible, what the fear of the Lord means with it.
Very fascinating. Okay. And last question here. So you talked about how the phenomenon of radiance in Hebrew becomes connected with the root kavod or kaved. Can you talk about how this is different than how it's used in Mesopotamia? So you briefly mentioned this, but they don't have any concept of heaviness, do they?
No, they don't have. So what they describe is really solar appearance of deities. And what we have in the New Assyrian inscriptions is like that the Assyrian king understands himself as a representation of Ninorta, which is the war god. And Ninorta to this time is always presented as a solar deity with radiance. And so this concept is taken over by by the Assyrian king to show himself as this, how to explain it in English, to appear as the presence of Ninurta in front of his people, and also with all the media he uses, like seals, like other things what they distribute with trading. So then he always becomes visible as this kind of war god, the Assyrian king. But there is no meaning of heaviness or something like this we have in the Hebrew Bible. So what we have, and this is a concept which might be connected to Jerusalem, that we see that this typical kind of Canaan weather cult, what we had at the very beginning in Judah, was transformed to a kind of solar cult in Jerusalem as well, by building the Solomonic temple open to the east, that the sunlight illuminates the holiest of holies and everything. So, of course, then there was a reason to adopt this concept of solar representation also for Israel in this way.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much for explaining that there.
You're
Well,
welcome.
yeah, it's been a pleasure talking to you there. There's one thing I wanted to mention real last quick. So in Isaiah, I believe it's Isaiah 60 or maybe it's 65, it talks about almost how the Israelites are going, like in the future, going to be getting God's glory or something like that. Or God's going to give them glory. Are you familiar with that passage? And
Yeah, of course.
could you maybe talk about what's being described there?
Yeah, so in Isaiah 60, I guess you mean the way back to Jerusalem after the temple was built again. And what you see is that already in the book of Haggai, kavod is understood in a material form, and that all these very precious elements like jewelry, like gold, like silver was understood as a representation of kavod. And when they filled, and this is what I guess what you mean is like when they come back from exile and they fill the temple with all these material, then the kavod is present again. So what I'd always describe to my students is like, you can see it when you're in Jerusalem nowadays and you stay facing the east in the early morning when the sun comes up, and you see the Temple Mount, and you see the golden roof of the mosque there. Then you have this idea of radiance combined with the temple. And of course, everyone knew that within the temple there was also the royal I lost the word in Germany. It shuts. I'm sorry for that. So that they collected all the material goods there, that then of course then it's bound and it's always combined with this kind of polished metal or stones in this way that you see the kavod with it.
That's fascinating. Yeah. So just for my audience sake, chapter 61 says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you."
Yeah.
And later it says, "The glory appears over you."
Yeah.
And one interesting one is, let's see, "The glory of Lebanon will come to you, the juniper, the fir, and the cypress together to adorn my sanctuary, and I will glorify the place for my feet."
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
the glory of the Lebanon is always, these are the woods from the Lebanon. So you have this kind of special trees there. You see it in the Neo-Assyrian inscriptions as well, that the kings went out to the Lebanon to cut down the trees to raise up palaces and temple shrines, and we have the same within the Hebrew tradition. This is the location with the most valuable wood what we have in the entire ancient Near East. So
that's really yeah.
so we are talking about goods when it comes to Isaiah 60.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Well, I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's been a pleasure having you on here. Was there any other work that you've done that you want people to know about? Maybe they can check out?
Oh, okay. Yeah. The last thing I was doing was working on space and the meaning on space for within the Hebrew Bible, especially in the transformation from, we describe the temple shrine as heavens, and at the end we have an idea of God located in the heaven, but which means the atmosphere in this way. This was the last thing I was doing, and now I'm working on epistemology of the divine within the ancient Near East, especially within the Hebrew tradition, to understand more what people were thinking about the divine and what epistemology means, like ways of thinking structures in this way. So please feel free to check this out, Sar.
Awesome. Yes, please. Yeah, and we can check it out. Maybe we can have you back on here to talk about some of those things.
I would love to do this. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Please, everybody, check out your book on this topic. It's really fascinating stuff. I hope people have enjoyed this, and if you want to follow, make sure to like and subscribe. But otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
See you soon. Bye.